60 calendar days on the clock. The 13 categories your program taught, wrong state, Georgia lists 12. 2 of that federal 13 don't survive the trip across the state line, and one area shows up that the federal list never had. Which 2 and which 1? Pin that.
Floor, not ceiling. This is Erica, and that's the state track in 3 words. The federal regulation sets the minimum a state has to do. It's never handed a state its filing cabinet.
K here. Floors get built on. That's the episode.
Last time we walked the method for finding any state's rules in 10 minutes. Tonight we aim it at one state.
Rule 160-4-7-.05. Eligibility determination and categories of eligibility, a Georgia State Board rule, and every claim tonight comes out of it, or its 2 neighbors.
Write that number on your hand, Cynthia. It's the only one you need tonight.
Georgia, one state line, and the words on your paperwork change. Nobody mentions that at orientation.
Federal category names won't match what you type into a Georgia eligibility report. You were trained in one vocabulary and Georgia writes another. Both things are true, and only one goes in the file.
So what does that cost on a Tuesday? You reach for the category name you memorize, and Georgia's list doesn't offer you that word.
Here's the belief worth killing first. Everybody teaches the 13 as if it were universal, and it isn't. Georgia's own rule lists 12.
Erica, how many teachers get told that in a training?
Not enough. And that line isn't a private choice. Georgia hands it to an eligibility team, qualified professionals plus the parents, and wants a written eligibility report in the folder. Somebody reads that back to you 2 years later.
And if you moved here and you've been quietly doing that, you're ordinary, not reckless. Nobody handed you the state rule on day 1.
Read the rule, not the slide deck. Slides age quietly. A rule carries a date stamp.
The kitchen table version. Learn 12 words and learn them the way Georgia writes them.
The chat just pushed up the question I was planning to dodge for 2 more scenes. Fine. If Georgia lists only 12 categories, where did the missing federal one go?
Wrong question, and it's the one everybody asks. Nothing went missing. You're counting the wrong...
Counting the wrong what, Kai? Finish that, because if the count itself is off, then so is quick, honest ask while we are here. If this has been worth your time so far, hit like, then subscribe, and ring the bell. I know everyone asks, but this one is free, and it is how a small channel like this actually grows. So is everything after it. Kai, finish the sentence. And Professor Marchetti's at the desk to help us settle it either way.
The wrong list. Nothing went missing. Georgia didn't subtract from 13. Georgia wrote its own 12.
12 areas, lettered A through L, which matters because Georgia's opening line calls them the areas in which a child's considered to have a disability under IDEA.
Any of the following areas. Say that phrase again because it's doing quiet work, not categories, areas. That's Georgia's own operative sentence.
So pull the page itself up. Reading a state rule off somebody's slide is how the mistake spreads.
Line C. Deaf/hard of hearing, one area where the federal regulation runs to. Line D. Emotional and behavioral disorder, which the federal list calls emotional disturbance. Line E. Intellectual disability, 4 levels written into the name. Line H. Significant developmental delay. It ends at line L, no 13th letter.
Then count what you'd unlearn. 4 names on that page appear nowhere in the federal regulation, so a transfer teacher gets 4 chances to type the wrong word.
Where does a rule like this even come from, Professor?
Atlanta. The state board adopted this version in 2010, so it's been sitting in the state code ever since, amendable at any point.
Which is why before anybody copies this down, there's one thing to check first.
Current through rules and regulations filed through July 20th, 2026. Top of the page in red.
That stamp separates a current rule from one printed in 2019, and it sits in red because a rule can be amended between the week your district printed its manual and the week you...
Wait, amended how often? Are we checking this every August?
Once a year covers it. And the page settles 4 questions. Does the child meet criteria in one of the areas? Does the disability adversely affect performance? Does the child need special education? Was the primary factor something other than missing instruction?
4 yeses, in that order, and the eligibility team writes it up. But miss the last one and nothing above it counts.
Take a streaming service. Same company, different catalog in every country. The service is IDEA. The catalog is the state list. A title that's in one catalog and not another is a...
That analogy is going to get you in trouble in about 10 seconds.
It's in trouble right now, finishing it anyway. A title in one catalog and not another is a category name.
Okay, but what stops a country from shipping an empty catalog? Where's the floor in your version? That's where it breaks. Unlike a streaming catalog, this one has a legal floor under it, so a state doesn't get to quietly drop a title.
Fair. Literally then, Georgia lists 12 areas, and its own rule calls them how a child's considered to have a disability under IDEA.
And Georgia handles the overlap in a line most people skip. Autism spectrum disorder may exist concurrently with other areas of disability.
Safest way to put it. I mean, safest if you read the appendix. I did that at 6 this morning with a greyhound asleep on my foot, and I still read the line twice.
12 areas, 4 renamed. That's a third of the list you were taught.
You know what this reminds me of? I took over the PTA newsletter 2 years ago, temporarily, and found 3 style sheets nobody had ever...
Temporarily, 2 years.
Temporarily, 3 style sheets, and nobody had reconciled them.
Which is how this works. One documents the real one, so Georgia's is the one you sign.
One area on that list asks for more evidence than the federal floor does. Hold that one, because it changes what you collect.
So far, this only changes the words you write. Next is where the count starts deciding which box gets checked.
(13 minus 2 plus 1). That's how the federal list becomes Georgia's, and I resisted the line for a week because it makes a state sound like it edited a spreadsheet. But it checks against both rule texts.
Run it slowly. This is the part people copy down.
Deafness, hearing impairment, multiple disabilities, 3 separate federal entries. Georgia answers with deaf/hard of hearing as one area, no multiple disabilities area, and significant developmental delay added on. 13 minus 2 plus 1.
Multiple disabilities. Federal has it. This list doesn't.
So the count drops to 11. And Georgia doesn't leave those children unaddressed because its own rule lets one area sit alongside
Another, so one child can be eligible in 2 areas at once.
At once, areas of disability, plural, straight out of the autism appendix. Different mechanism, same problem solved.
And then Georgia adds, forget the adding, here's the one I told you to pin. Federal law makes developmental delay optional. Georgia writes it in as a full area, true for almost every area on that list. Almost. One has an expiration date written into it, which teams find out late.
11 goes back up to 12. Significant developmental delay, full area, letter I.
H.
H. It's correct, and I would have preferred to catch that myself.
Letter H. Ages 3 through 9. Moving on.
Cynthia, read me the actual line. Not the summary, the line, because this is the sentence the whole episode hangs on.
Straight off the page. Autism spectrum disorder may exist concurrently with other areas of disability, and on the delay area, it may be used for children from ages 3 through 9.
Thank you. If you hold one thing tonight, hold that the page beats the training binder. Same child, different word, and it stops being abstract fast. Autism, or autism spectrum disorder. Emotional disturbance, or emotional and behavioral disorder. Developmental delay, or significant developmental delay. Deafness and hearing impairment, or one hearing area.
4 words. That's the whole translation table. Wait until you see what the clock does to it.
Call it Georgia's spelling. Same child, same needs, the state spelling on the line you sign.
Make it real, Erica. 3rd grader, moves in from Ohio, already carries a hearing impairment label. What does the Georgia team write?
Deaf/hard of hearing. One Georgia area covers both, so the label converts on this side of the paperwork.
Converts. So the child's needs didn't change. The word did.
The word, and the appendix behind it. That area wants an audiological evaluation annually from a certified or licensed audiologist, so the calendar picked up
So the count's cosmetic. Same kids, same services, different nouns.
not cosmetic, Georgia's rule bars a finding when the primary factor is lack of appropriate instruction in reading, in mathematics, or limited English proficiency. That's about who gets in, not what you call them.
3 bars on the way in. I'll take that back.
So the missing federal one never went anywhere, it merged. The floor gets written in one building, and that building never wrote your file.
Different documents.
Right file, right word. Professor Marchetti's still with us, and this is the area he flagged. Specific learning disability, where Georgia asked 2 things and the federal floor asked 1.
2 things, not either or.
Both kinds of evidence. To document a pattern of strengths and weaknesses, Georgia's rule wants a comprehensive assessment of intellectual development. It has to target the processing skills feeding the academic weakness, current within 12 months. Separately, it wants current response to intervention data showing the lack of sufficient progress. One's a test, one's a record of your teaching.
Which is the loop we held open. More evidence than the floor asks for, so more work for the team assembling it.
Put the sentence up. People quote this one at each other from memory and get half right.
A comprehensive assessment of intellectual development, current within 12 months. Then, separately, current response to intervention data.
But 12 months is the part that catches teams. A cognitive assessment from 3 years back doesn't carry this, so your clock runs while somebody retests.
And 12 weeks is the floor on the intervention side. Where the strategy itself names no period of time, Georgia's rule sets a minimum of 12 weeks.
12 weeks, most of a semester, spent proving what you suspected in week 2.
12 weeks minimum, and only where the strategy doesn't name its own period. Write the start date down.
You're right about the start date. Sharper question. What do you do in week 3 when it's obviously not working?
You don't stop the clock, you document why. The rule wants the interventions and the progress results presented to parents at regular intervals.
So picture the file this rule wants. 2 current assessments inside 12 months. Teacher reporting on the areas of difficulty. Evidence-based instruction implemented as designed. Progress data shown to parents. Then a classroom observation after consent and the exclusionary check.
But there's a hard bar under all of it. Georgia won't call it a disability when the primary factor was lack of appropriate instruction in reading, in mathematics, or limited English.
Can I run the case I keep circling?
The reading one. Go.
Take a composite, 4th grader reading a grade and a half behind. Referred in October, maybe November. Every adult certain. And the file carries no intervention record, because the school swapped reading programs twice.
So the 12 weeks never happened.
The 12 weeks never happened. And the child sits. Not because anybody doubted the need, but because the rule wants a record of instruction first.
Which means the paperwork you keep in September is what gets a child served in March.
Here's what I still can't answer. How long does a Georgia evaluation actually take?
2 ways to answer, and the first one's wrong. It isn't 1 clock. Georgia runs 60 calendar days for the evaluation, then a separate 30 for the meeting.
And the evidence trail under it is Georgia's student support team. The rule expects progress monitoring out of general education and SST intervention plans.
Professor Marchetti, the honest question, is asking for both a protection or is it a delay?
Both, and I won't pretend otherwise. 2 independent sources guard against labeling a child who was simply never taught. There are also 2 more things to schedule, and a child waits through it. I keep that on the record.
Which is the honest shape of it. If your data's there, the double requirement costs nothing. If it isn't, it costs a semester, and the child pays that.
Professor Marchetti, thank you. The sharpest thing you put on this desk is that Georgia's list is its own, not a federal one with edits.
Held. My reservation stays on the record.
60 calendar days for the evaluation, then 30 days for the meeting that writes the plan. Kai, you pulled the evaluation timeline apart this morning. What's the calendar number people get wrong first?
60 calendar days. Not school days. Not 60 business days.
60 calendar days of receiving parental consent for evaluation. That's the rule's own wording.
Holiday periods. 5 consecutive school days or more, and those days don't count.
A vacation period where most teachers aren't under contract stays out of the 62.
So in April, consent could land in September?
No, and this is the exception nobody quotes.
Consent received 30 days or more before the school year ends still finishes inside the 60.
Meaning what in a sentence?
Sign it in April and you don't get the summer.
That's Cynthia's lane. I'd get the school calendar decimals wrong.
It's a wall calendar, not decimals. Count the days the building sits empty, hand them back. Say a parent signs on September 15th, 60 calendar days lands on November 14th.
And every pause only pushes that date later, never earlier.
Write the 60-day date the day consent arrives. Not the week after, not when you get around to.
Says the man whose houseplants run on a watering system he built.
They're thriving. Put the date on the calendar the same day.
Then 30 days for the meeting that writes the plan.
Day 0, consent, 60 days, evaluation done. 30 more, the IEP meeting. 1 year, annual review.
3 years, reevaluation. Unless the parent and the district agree it's unnecessary.
And the annual review has to land every 12 months to the...
Not less than annually. That's the wording, and it's looser than a date.
Not less than annually, better, which for planning purposes is actually...
Temporarily. In other words,
worse. Looser is worse, and I'm the one building a schedule out of the slack.
slow down. This next eligibility rule is the bit people replay.
Significant developmental delay runs ages 3 through 9, but initial eligibility has to be set, with an IEP in place, by the 7th birthday.
That's the expiration date.
7th birthday.
A 6-year-old in your building is on a clock nobody wrote on the calendar.
Georgia's spelling. Georgia's clock.
To borrow Kai's word, the catalog's local, so's the calendar.
So here's what I do this week. Open the rule, check the date stamp, write in Georgia's words. Erica, what goes in a teacher's hands tomorrow morning?
Open 160-4-7-.05 and read the 12 names out loud.
Yeah, half.
Other half's your caseload. Find every file that still uses a federal word.
And send this to the teacher who transferred in from out of state last August.
The one line to keep from tonight. Your state writes the list, and the list is what you sign.
If this saved one wrong word on one report, hit like and subscribe for the next state. So which word from your training does your state not actually spell that way? Go pull one file tonight. This is Cynthia, and I'll see you at the next state line.